Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, Ashlee Breitner.
Welcome to our first workforce breakout session, to this riveting panel on workforce analysis. Riveting's probably not the word you thought of when you thought of workforce analysis, right? But something obviously attracted you here. And at the end of the day, without strong data and strong understanding of our analysis of our workforce system, we can't have strong, effective programs and resources. But often the conversation in the workforce space leads to discussions around what programs are out there, what resources are available. Today, we're going to try to dig deep into the data side of things. I'm super excited to have an esteemed panel here with me today who are all experts in this space and hopefully willing to share something with you all today. At the end of, also, when we look at workforce development, it's an interesting space we're in right now, right? In the EV space. There's lots of ups and downs in the world related to electric vehicles. And so we're excited to bring this panel forward today to share some of their expertise with you. So I'm going to individually introduce our panelists. And first, I'd like to introduce Director Corbin. Director Corbin serves as Director of the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity since its creation in August of 2019. Previous to that, though, she held senior leadership roles under Governors Whitmer and Granholm, including oversight of the unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, and MIOSHA. She began her career supporting international relations with China for several Michigan departments and holds a degree in international relations from Michigan State University. Welcome to the stage, Director Corbin. Thank you. Next up, Chase Attanasio is a policy manager at Clean Fuels Michigan, a nonprofit trade organization working to grow the clean mobility sector in Michigan. He supports legislator education and policy engagement in Lansing, helping advance practical, bipartisan pathways for cleaner transportation. Chase recently co-authored a transportation electrification policy roadmap designed to guide Michigan's leaders on policies that enable the state's transportation and electrification goals. He is based here in Ann Arbor and is a graduate also of Michigan State University. Welcome to the stage, Chase. And finally, Bernard Swiecki is Vice President of Mobility and Research at the Detroit Regional Partnership, an economic development nonprofit serving the 11-county Detroit region. He leads mobility and automotive research supporting the Global Epicenter of Mobility, or also for many of you known as GEM, helping the region's ecosystem welcome better connected, smarter, and be more inclusive as it adapts to this rapid change. Previously, Bernard led research at the Automotive Center for Automotive Research, directing the Automotive Communities Partnership, and producing work on electrification and automaker supplier dynamics. Welcome to the stage, Bernard. Welcome, panelists. So we're going to start off our morning by each panelist giving you a quick presentation. They're going to cover some of the work that they're doing within their organizations around data and analysis in the workforce in electrification space. So first, I'd like to welcome to the podium, it's Director Corbin.
Thank you very much. Just have to make one little comment. When I was in that earlier room, I looked around and thought, there aren't very many women in this room. I think all the women came to this room. So glad to see that we're close to a majority here in this room. As Ashlee said, I'm Susan Corbin. I'm director of the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. LEO was created by Governor Whitmer early in her administration. Her goal is to make Michigan a place where all people, businesses, and communities have the economic means and personal freedoms to reach their full potential. At the core of our work at LEO are guiding principles that shape everything we do: a steadfast commitment to equity, a people-centered approach, collaboration to achieve unity of purpose and greater success, and data and evidence-based promotion of opportunity for every Michigander. We remain focused on expanding opportunity and prosperity in every corner of our state, from rural towns to urban centers and everywhere in between. With this in mind, we're embracing new ways to work towards Michigan's future together. As Michigan prepares for the global shift from the internal combustion engine vehicles to electric vehicles and meeting our 24 climate and energy goals, the state's Community and Worker Economic Transition Office is developing proactive strategies that help communities, workers, and employers proactively prepare for, benefit from, and shape Michigan's future economy. The office is working towards our vision for a thriving, resilient, and prosperous Michigan by helping legacy manufacturers retool their factories to enter new sectors and create more resilient supply chains. We're retraining workers to be a part of these new supply chains and in sectors with high quality, good paying jobs, and supporting communities as they develop economic diversification and resiliency plans so we are no longer single sector dependent. Right now, Michigan leads the Midwest in the number of clean energy workers, and recent investments in batteries and vehicle electrification have led to economic growth and jobs for Michiganders. As we prepare for economic growth, we're making sure we are training the workforce of tomorrow. We rely on many partners to help accomplish this. Many of you are in this room. And it importantly includes this partnership with the University of Michigan and the Electric Vehicle Center. Michigan is unique in that our workforce and post-secondary education systems are somewhat decentralized, which means that for us to be effective, we must build and foster strong partnerships with our local workforce agencies, community colleges, universities, and other training providers. What this means in practice is that we're getting Michiganders on the path to good paying jobs, including in the battery and EV industry, and we're providing support to remove barriers like transportation or childcare, making sure anyone can make it in Michigan. This is all part of Michigan's statewide workforce plan, a comprehensive roadmap that aligns state government and external partners to create jobs and support workers and employers. Under the plan's 3 core pillars, we're helping more Michiganders earn a skills certificate or a degree. We're increasing access to opportunities that grow the middle class, and we're supporting business and entrepreneurial growth through talent solutions. So when we're looking at building our workforce, we're looking at the unique needs of each industry, along with broad strategies that give Michiganders access to meaningful, good-paying jobs, meeting the needs of employers, and building a talent pipeline. In continuing efforts to build our workforce, our Michigan Auto Workforce Hub is piloting up to 3 regional consortia that brings together K-12 educators and manufacturers to develop high-quality training programs at the local and regional levels. This will ensure students have in-demand skills and are connected with local workforce opportunities upon graduation. We will document these models as best practices and make them publicly available to other communities to adopt. It's also critical to identify challenges our workforce faces and to help remove barriers to employment. We're paving the way and turning data into actionable change through our Reliable Rides playbook. In late 2024, Michigan's State Workforce Board, along with our Department of Employment and Training, sent out a survey on the top structural barriers to employment. 6 of the top challenges were related to transportation. This data led to the development of the Reliable Rides playbook and grant program. helping employers with a step-by-step guide to support their employees with transportation challenges with tools employers can adapt right away. Training our workforce takes a multifaceted approach, and we cannot do it alone. Together, we're moving forward to make Michigan the best state to work and live, and we're preparing for the future's needs today. So I'm looking forward to the conversation this morning.
Morning, everybody. Like Ashlee mentioned, my name is Chase Attanasio. I'm policy manager with Clean Fuels Michigan. We are a nonprofit trade association working with businesses in Michigan's clean mobility sector, advocating on behalf of our members to make Michigan a better place to build, deploy, and adopt the mobility technologies of the future. Our statewide perspective when it comes to clean mobility is that we need affordable, clean vehicles, preferably vehicles that are being built and designed here in Michigan, robust infrastructure to power those vehicles, and a capable workforce, which will be the topic of our discussion for today. Before we dive into some of those workforce topics, though, I want to give the context that Clean Fuels Michigan kind of looks at this approach, and starting first with Michigan's transportation decarbonization goals. Director Corbin alluded to some of these earlier in her presentation. But Michigan has really strong goals related to climate and decarbonization, and those have trickled obviously into our transportation sector. And transportation is a really critical area of focus when we're talking about decarbonization. Transportation-related emissions account for 29% of Michigan's greenhouse gas emissions. So when we're talking about meeting economy-wide carbon neutrality by 2050, transportation is a really critical sector and area of focus. So we have a series of plans put in place and directives for our industry and other stakeholders to be following. The executive directive on carbon neutrality by 2050 came out in 2020. That was followed by Governor Whitmer's My Healthy Climate Plan. And then stakeholders, state agencies, which included LEO, EGLE, MDOT, and others, put together the My Future Mobility Plan. And together, all of those plans put goals forward. The state of Michigan is working towards deploying 2 million electric vehicles on Michigan's roads by 2030 and the necessary infrastructure to support those vehicles, which the original estimates were around 100,000 chargers deployed to support those deployments. So we have all of those environmental climate goals for the state of Michigan, but as an industry and trade association, we're also looking at the direction that the industry is moving and the competition that Michigan's automakers are facing. And so this first slide here really refers to the fact that Michigan's automakers are competing in a global market. And the graph on the left, and sorry that some of the text is a little bit small, but you'll see there highlighted in purple is China's vehicle exports, and the time range there is from 2016 to 2024. And you can see between 2020 and 2024, China went from lowest on this graph all the way to being the largest automotive exporter in the world across all their powertrains. And the bottom line there in gray is the United States, which you can see has remained relatively stagnant. And I would suggest and postulate that a lot of that growth that China has seen in automotive exports is being driven by their prowess in electric vehicle manufacturing, which is displayed on this bubble graph here on the right, which is only electric vehicle production. You can see that China, which is the bubble here on the right, by far and large dominates electric vehicle production globally. And it's important to note that those are not only to meet domestic demands in China, but China exports more electric vehicles than the United States exports across all powertrains. So they're meeting global demand. And so when we're talking about industry in the United States meeting global demand, there's clear demonstration for export markets for electric vehicles there. But Michigan's automakers aren't competing only globally, but they're also competing domestically when we're talking about making sure that Michigan retains our leadership position in the automotive industry. Michigan and the Midwest have long reigned, and Michigan obviously has a long legacy of automotive experience and expertise in manufacturing. But we're seeing other parts of the country grow as electric vehicle adoption continues to increase. And in particular, we're seeing growing competition from the Southeast region. The chart here on the right shows all EV jobs announced current to about the end of 2025. You can see Michigan is actually in second place in this graph to Georgia. And then if you captured the southeastern states of Tennessee, North and South Carolina, the Southeast actually outpaces the Midwest in terms of electric vehicle job growth alone. And you can see that's trickling into all automotive sectors on the graph on the left here. Shows that the South is quickly approaching, and if not, they've already surpassed the Midwest in all automotive production. So when you're counting both electric vehicle and internal combustion engine. So I say all of that to say that there's a lot of opportunity in electrification, and it's really critical that Michigan focus on transportation electrification in order to remain competitive, both globally and domestically. To give a bit of a picture about what we're looking at in terms of EV adoption in Michigan, I just have a few slides here on this. This data came from the Secretary of State in the fall of 2025, so it's already a little bit outdated, but Michigan ranks second in the Midwest in terms of EVs adopted. In the fall, we had about 85,000 battery electric vehicles registered in the state. We've now officially surpassed 100,000 battery electric vehicles, but when you count plug-in hybrids and full hybrid electric vehicles or your self-charging hybrids, Michigan has over 300,000 vehicles on the road that have a larger battery that could be charged. And we're also seeing growth in market share in Michigan. Michigan saw the largest jump in market share of EV sales. At the end of 2025, 1 in every 10 vehicles sold in Michigan was an electric vehicle, which is about on track with the national average. But that represented nearly a 5% jump from 2024. So a huge growth in consumers that are interested in electric vehicles. And we're seeing that interest in electric vehicles being enabled by our infrastructure deployments. Michigan is doing a really great job in deploying electric charging infrastructure, both fast chargers across the state in both peninsulas and level 2 chargers at home, multifamily housing, workplace charging, and those things. Michigan, latest data from the Department of Energy's Alternative Fuels Data Center said that there were 5,839 EV charging ports across 2,400 locations, which again puts Michigan in second in terms of EV charger access across the state. Lots of exciting opportunities and funding opportunities to continue to deploy EV chargers, and we continue to see strong growth in that sector. So I provide all that context to say that there's strong growth in electric vehicle adoption in Michigan, a strong motivation from industry and our climate goals. And that's translating directly into a strong clean mobility workforce demand in the state. This data is from 2024, the Midwest Clean Jobs Report suggested that Michigan had over 34,000 jobs directly tied to the electric vehicle and other clean transportation sectors. And a report done by the World Resources Institute took a look at all the announced projects for new manufacturing jobs and new deployments in the state, suggested that Michigan could add as many as 56,000 new jobs in the electric vehicle and clean mobility sectors by 2030. This slide here provides a little bit more insight into the types of jobs that we're seeing. A lot of those jobs are specifically in the vehicle segment, but we're also seeing jobs in other alternative clean fuels like ethanol, biodiesel, and those things, but really being driven by the vehicle segment. In 2024, there were 3,210 jobs added to Michigan's clean vehicle sector, which is a 13% increase, which made the clean vehicle sector the fastest growing job sector in the state of Michigan. So across all jobs, not just clean jobs, the clean vehicle sector was the fastest growing in the state. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics kind of affirms this growth. They suggest that electrical equipment, component manufacturing, which includes battery and other electric vehicle components, they expect that to be the 5th fastest growing job sector nationwide, adding as many as close to 50,000 jobs across the country. So since we're talking about data today, I brought some data of my own. Again, Bureau of Labor Statistics suggests that there's going to be a workforce shortage in EV technicians of nearly 35,000 by 2028, being driven by our aging skilled trade workforce. There's a lot of misperceptions about what jobs in the clean vehicle sector look like, limited awareness among our K through 12 students when we're trying to encourage them to enter these job pathways. They don't know necessarily what these careers look like. Providing equitable access to training programs is a limitation. There's only so many seats that instructors can provide in the training programs that do exist, so we have limitation capacities. And then we'll talk again, I'm sure, in more detail about the shortage of long-term career data that is a limiting factor as well. And then the chart here on the right I thought was interesting was from the SAE's ATMC training benchmark. So this is a survey that they do annually of all incumbent automotive technicians. And the question that was asked was, what training do you see is most needed? Again, this was a response came from directly from existing automotive technicians. And the number one item that was flagged or selected in the response was training on hybrid and EV systems, followed by electrical and electronic systems. So we're seeing even in the incumbent workforce that there's a strong demand for new training on the mobility technologies that are being deployed. So for Clean Fuels Michigan, what we're trying to do is create some more certainty around the types of careers and jobs that are being created in this sector. I highlighted here, we have our Clean Mobility Career Pathways report, which is now in its second iteration, which came out in the fall. This report is focused on low barrier entry level career pathways, really focused on those technical roles in manufacturing in the state, and highlight programs that are really focused on fundamentals, don't require a post-secondary degree, and have stackable credentials, have huge upside for career growth and cross-cutting skills. So folks that are taking training in electric vehicles are getting exposure to things across hardware and software that can be applied across many different industries. So that's what I have for my slide deck. That QR code will take you directly to the Career Pathways report that I mentioned, but looking forward to diving in on some of these topics.
Good morning, everyone. It's really cool to be here because I started my career at the Transportation Research Center, or UMTRI, literally just across the street. So that was back in the 1900s. So Ashlee, thank you. Thank you for not putting a date on those graduation times. But yeah, so long history here. Right now at the Detroit Regional Partnership, working on GEM, or the Global Epicenter of Mobility. And, first of all, I wanted to tell you a little bit about what GEM is and what our work really pertains to. So it is a program with 24 different entities sponsored by the Economic Development Administration from the Department of Commerce. And it really is kind of a comprehensive effort to align the 24 different entities to work to solve a series of issues or maybe competitiveness challenges that this region has in this era of electrification. And I won't go through them one by one, but hopefully a lot of these that you see on the screen are familiar, which I think I would summarize it as we have unrivaled capability to churn out, develop, produce these new modern technology products. But we're not necessarily all rowing in the same direction. So, frankly, I see a lot of my role as helping this large beast kind of largely flow and move in the same direction. Now, our work is divided into the 6 pillars that you see here. Specifically, I work at a thing called GEM Central, which is kind of the overall organizing body. But the pillars here hopefully provide to you a little bit of like the full maybe value chain or lifeline of a company that is being founded somehow in mobility, right? And these include everything from helping an entrepreneur, a startup, begin their enterprise, proving and testing with the state of Michigan. Hopefully they develop to be large enough to need a site. We have a site program. Ashlee is part of the legacy and transition pillar, which helps existing companies transition into some of these future mobility products. And what you'll see is that none of this happens without the right workforce. And therefore we have the workforce pillar run by SEMCA. And we have multiple SEMCA people here, just like we have GEM really very well represented at this event today, which is great to see. And frankly, it kind of tells me that we have the 24 right entities to be a part of that. But you'll see the largest pillar in our work is workforce, right? Because none of the other pillars, none of those functions happen without the right people. And so it's the glue that really lets the entire enterprise function. But we're here to talk about data. We need information. And that's kind of where my role comes in. And by the way, there is a whole lot of cool stuff you can get for free online from Jim. So we're getting to that. But we're combining research and storytelling. And that research needs to provide actionable information for these 24 different entities, but we're also making much of it available to the general public. So we'll be happy to share it with you as well. Now, as the foundation of it all, back in 2024, which I know now seems like an eternity ago, we did with S&P Global Mobility a study that we called the Future Mobility Technologies Study, or FMTS for short, because it doesn't really roll off the tongue very easily. And so the idea was, okay, first of all, to start, we need to know within all these different mobility sectors, ranging from automotive to aerospace to maritime, what are the technologies within those sectors that are going to be kind of the next hot thing? What is it that we need to be able to do well to be competitive in the future? And we set 2030 as kind of our Northern Star point in time. So our work revealed these 7 technologies to be the most critical, right? So we need a workforce that can handle all the things that go into developing and producing these technologies. And hopefully they all sound pretty familiar, but I'll go through them. One, the battery itself, and then the electric motors in the vehicle that make it go. If it's a car, obviously that means turning the wheels, but it could be a boat, could be a drone, could be any of those things. And by the way, when we talk about drones, we're talking, the large ones, the commercial drones. The little photography drones that you use, those are more RC toy motors and batteries and so on. You need a certain scale of drone for it to really apply to these mobility sectors and share technologies and components with them. But yes, and then there are a few enabling technologies like power electronics, thermal efficiency. Those products are critical because electrification doesn't happen without those things, even though it's the batteries that kind of get all the glory. Fuel cells, another way to have an electric vehicle without necessarily the same size battery. So hydrogen fuel cells. And then 2 technologies that are a little bit more abstract and ambiguous. Software, but not all software, specifically software-defined vehicles, cybersecurity, and over-the-air update capability. And then assembly automation, or essentially kind of a larger take on Industry 4.0. Now, I mentioned, and by the way, you have here all of the growth rates and the technology penetration rates for these technologies. But I mentioned that this was done in 2024, and a lot has changed, right? We have a new president. We have some new different national policies. We also have policies that have taken away previous policies, like that $7,500 electric vehicle credit. And so I'll tell you what that has done to these technologies, because that's a very obvious question. Essentially, we went back to S&P Global Mobility and we raised this question to them. And here's what we got. These 7 technologies are still the 7 hot technologies, right? All these different changes that we have had, they may change an adoption rate, they may change the timing, and so on. But basically, if you were putting together a basket of 7 cool, important things for the region to be working on, it would still be this basket. Now, to it, we have enhanced a little bit. We have added ADAS, or Advanced Driver Assistance Systems, and we have just completed a study on that. In fact, there'll be a webinar on that on April 16th, so you could check out some of this content. But that, to us, is that sort of family of products that we need to be looking at, and it serves as the foundation for all of our related research. So you can go to this website, The Road to 2030, GEM Detroit, pretty darn easy to find. But every one of these technologies has a module, and employment statistics are a part of those modules. And we're releasing these modules on a 1-by-1 basis as we go. Every one of those modules has a webinar that goes along with it, where we talk to experts on that particular topic. And all of that is there for free for you to access. Plus, you can always come to us with questions. Now, I mentioned, that we got those 7 technologies, we added ADAS, We also know that for internal combustion engines, there are internal combustion related technologies, we call it advanced ICE, that may see prioritization because, we're going to see hybrids around longer than forecast a few years ago, essentially. But we, with our partners at SEMCA, who are the leaders of our workforce pillar, essentially SEMCA undertook a large study that built on that future mobility technology study that looked at specifically the things that I believe will be of interest to this room. And that was done with PwC. And so the idea was, the approach was, okay, all those technologies that we looked at, what is that technology? Really it's the products that are necessary to put that in a vehicle. So you need certain capabilities to develop those products, to engineer them, to produce them, and actually get them deployed into the fleet. So, what are the products that comprise each of these technologies? And then what are the skills? What are the training? What are the adjacent skills that go together with all of that? And that's really what this study looked at. Now, the approach was really kind of cool. What the PwC team did is they built upon that technology study by looking at all the NAICS codes, the product codes, essentially making one large composite NAICS world that captured all of this and then looked at the related workforce implications. And so the team from SEMCA is here, and I'm sure many, if not all of you already know them. But I was part of this effort, even though it is a SEMCA study. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you may have. And then, of course, the SEMCA team is here as well. But essentially, one of the things that it boils down to is with the slowdowns that we have had in many of these electrification forecasts, the importance of adjacent jobs is huge. What can we train someone for right now that exists that would then set them up well to transition to an electrified product down the road when the production volumes are higher? So that's what we're looking at in that particular effort. So that is the end of my prepared comments. Looking forward to the discussion, and I did throw in some contact information for me as well, but I'm pretty darn easy to find anytime. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for those great insights. I hope you learned something new today. I know I did. And I have some prepared questions for our panel today, but we're also going to have some time at the end to take a few from the audience. So start jotting down your thoughts or questions that you have for the panel throughout our discussion. The first question for the panel, as I put on my workforce development hat for the Electric Vehicle Center, our team hears me ask this question often. A lot of times we're approached with different project opportunities, or we have ideas of programming and resources we should develop and put out there. And I always say to myself and to the team, where's the data, right? Show me the justification. We've got to see the market justification behind putting our resources towards this investment to show there's a need for developing workforce resources. Many organizations collect workforce data. Raise your hand if you think your organization collects some level of workforce data. Yeah, most do, right? I won't make you keep your hands up for the second question, but how many of you then think that data then translates to action? Couple, right? Not as many of us can take that data and really translate it to action. So my first question for the panel, and any of you can jump in on this, what's one good example you've all seen of how better workforce data has led to, or could potentially lead to, a more effective workforce development solution? Anyone want to jump in?
I can give a very recent example that we've been working on, not directly related to EV, but I think there are some adjacent careers.
Sure.
And that is the investment that we have been able to make recently in shipbuilding. I don't know if you're aware that Michigan now has a statewide maritime strategy. That strategy was developed with several state departments working on it: Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, Transportation, and LEO, but also with strong support from the University of Michigan and the Naval Architecture Program. So we know that the United States is very far behind in shipbuilding. Of course, you can guess who leads the world in shipbuilding. Just like electric vehicles, it's China. But we know by looking at the data that there are 87,000 job openings in shipbuilding in Michigan, shipbuilding and submarine suppliers. And that runs across 31 different career pathways. So we worked with the Navy and created at what we call M3 with Macomb Community College. And so Macomb Community College has responsibility for this M3 training program, which trains people in welding and CNC, you know, a very short credential that then, you know, puts them into a fantastic career in shipbuilding. We've got really strong outcomes with people who are graduating from that program being hired by, you know, we have 300 suppliers in Michigan. So we have had the opportunity to dive a little bit deeper into that and work with those 300 suppliers. We've gotten a federal grant from the U.S. Department of Labor, and we are now creating kind of an industry-driven training program that we are rolling out now that we will be able to, you know, provide training dollars directly to those 300 employers across the state so that, you know, they can train incumbent and new employees in the skills that they need.
Yeah, that's a great example, and it gives me a lot of hope. You know, when you think about 300 suppliers, if you think a few thousand in the automotive space, with really solid data, we can make really meaningful impacts in that way.
But at the state level, we couldn't do it without knowing that, you know, there's going to be some federal investment. The Department of Navy supported the development of the Macomb Community College training program, but they, you know, told us that funding stream would end in 2027. So the governor's proposed $5 million in her budget to continue supporting that program. And without the $8 million grant from the U.S. Department of Labor, you know, we wouldn't be able to create and stand up this new program. So we are keeping our eye on any future funding opportunities, and we do expect some additional competitive opportunities coming from the federal government in shipbuilding.
That's a great example. Go ahead, Bernard.
Yeah, no, just Susan, I want to make a comment about what you just talked about, which is both fascinating and gratifying to me, because working at GEM, you know, obviously we don't produce anything, right? We provide information and data to these different entities, but one of the things that's really been coming through is in this era of greater electrification, AI, and sort of a software-driven world, the cross flows between our core automotive industry and aviation, shipbuilding, and so on are so much stronger than ever. And so we were finally able to put some data to it in terms of which products, which technologies, which occupation codes flow, you know, between these different mobility sectors. You know, and so it's very cool to see this region being better able to capitalize on those kinds of opportunities, you know, because I feel like even as recently as 5-10 years ago, it was a much more siloed world in terms of who played in which of those sandboxes. And I really, really am gratified to see the amount of sort of cross-population between sandboxes that we have happening now.
Yeah, and we know those students that are graduating from that program, not all of them are being hired by suppliers to the shipbuilding and submarine industry, that some of them are being hired into our auto industry or auto suppliers.
Yeah, and frankly, just one more comment. There are silver linings, right? So no, it's not good that, you know, recently we're seeing a lot of the electrification forecasts, much more pessimistic than they had been 2, 3, 4 years ago. But in a way, there is an upside, which is that, okay, that's for electric vehicles, cars, trucks, right? But since we developed that capacity, that knowledge, we now can apply it to other mobility sectors, but also stationary power storage and generation, right? Before, this is not something we could do in a non-electrified world, but we can in this case. And so that's, a mobility product that has an absolutely non-mobility application. Your average Chevy truck 10 years ago wouldn't, but they do today. And I feel like that is really helping us play a larger role than we otherwise could have. It's us capitalizing on how things are different today.
I think that's a great point. And, I always say the second silver lining in this EV transition space, and with the slowdown we've seen here in the last year to 2 years, is before the data showed us we weren't going to be able to meet demand in terms of serving the workforce need for training solutions, upskilling the workforce. Now with this slowdown, to me, I see it as an opportunity for us to get there, and to get there at the same time the market does. And so I think it's a tremendous opportunity for us to keep moving forward, as many of us in the room are, but also be able to better meet the need at the time that the industry is there. So Bernard, I'm going to kind of build off what you just said there. And in your Road to 2030 study, you identified those emerging mobility technologies. How should workforce leaders use that type of technology forecasting data today to prepare talent pipelines for the future?
Yeah, sure. So, for me, it's kind of it's a breadcrumb kind of distilling process, which is, you go from the technologies to what are the products that make up each technology, to then, all right, what goes into developing and designing and manufacturing each one, and then you get the occupation codes. Now, a critical focus, I believe right now, is what are, what we call the adjacent jobs, because, and Ashlee, I really like what you said about the opportunity in the delays of some of these electrification forecasts. But if you're a workforce entity today and you want to provide this region with a workforce that can handle those future electrified vehicle needs, right? What do you train people for today, given that job may not exist for another 5 years or a decade? And that's where those adjacent occupations really come to the rescue. So for me, it's take that and study it, find out which jobs you can train people for today that have the highest cross flows into those future jobs. And then you end up with, more of a future-proofed region as a result.
Great. I appreciate that. Hopefully we all can build upon that here over the next couple of years as things will continue to ramp up and likely ramp up more quickly in a few years. Chase, I'm going to switch to you. Specific question for you. Obviously, with the slowdown or uncertainty around EV adoption and federal policy changes, what's your perspective on why workforce development in this space is still really critical to focus on here, particularly in the state of Michigan?
Yeah, we've already been kind of hinting at that as well, but I think we heard from Dr. Taub this morning, and again, I've talked about, it's a hiccup in the direction that we were heading in terms of electrification. But I think there's still no doubt that the direction the industry is heading is towards an electrified future. Unfortunately, it just seems the pace has maybe slowed down a little bit. And so you see headlines, that might make people question about whether or not the direction the industry is still moving. But I think we're still getting really strong signals from American automakers and in Michigan that electrification is the future. That's the direction we're heading. It's just maybe more of a question of how quickly that transition will take place. And I think workforce is really a critical place to be focusing. I think in my slides I talked about, we're still deploying vehicles, we're still deploying infrastructure, and there's workforce ties directly related to those deployments. And so we need to make sure that we have people that are able to deploy that infrastructure, maintain the infrastructure in the vehicles themselves. And then I think the point that Bernard and you, Ashlee, have also made, it maybe even gives us an opportunity to kind of catch up. I also in my slides talked about the potential gaps that we have in our workforce in the coming years. because of some of the forecasts for electric vehicle adoption. As that pace slows down, it gives us an opportunity to be more concentrated in training a skilled workforce, making sure that we have people with the credentials and training that they need to operate on electric vehicles, to maintain and service them, and to deploy electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and those things. And I think the workforce is a really critical component to kind of summarize and answer your question. Ashlee, is a really critical focus for us in Michigan, again, because of what I was talking about when we're looking at how Michigan has to compete nationally now. We're seeing an emerging hub in the Southeast, and a lot of that investment is being drawn towards that region because of their workforce readiness. And so if we want Michigan to be able to compete, we have to combat with all those challenges that I listed out, make sure that we have a strong talent pipeline in place, a strong workforce that's ready in order to capture the opportunity that is available to us from these large-scale EV and associated projects, I think, that are coming down the pipeline.
Absolutely. Director Corbin, the state is probably collecting more data than any organization in the state, right? That's my guess anyways. How would you say you're using that workforce data to anticipate emerging talent needs? Is there any good way, or how would you describe that for the rest of us?
I want to take it to a little bit higher level first, because I think we need to recognize the investments that have happened in the past few years around post-secondary education, and a recognition that in Michigan, we were behind other states in terms of setting goals for our state. This governor set a goal of 60 by 30, getting 60% of our citizens with a post-secondary degree by 2030. Most states in the country had already set a goal like that, so we lagged in setting that goal, but we now have that goal. And I think when that goal was set, we sat at 45% of our population with some kind of post-secondary degree. We launched the Reconnect program, which our legislature created with the governor, which provides anybody in Michigan over the age of 25 with a pathway to getting a 2-year community college degree or a skills certificate tuition-free. We now sit at, I think, about 52% of our citizens with a post-secondary degree or a skills certificate. And in addition to the investments that we're making with the Reconnect program, we also have the Achievement Scholarship now in Michigan, which provides somebody with, a graduating senior with, $27,000 to put towards a 4-year degree. There's also a lower funding level for a 2-year degree or some other kind of skill certificate. So I think the investments that we're making now in Michigan in terms of post-secondary education are just game changers. So, we follow big picture, all of that data. We know that in Michigan, if somebody has a post-secondary degree, they're much more likely to be in the workforce. We've really closed the gap in terms of our labor force participation rate. We always, beginning in 2000, we took even a bigger hit during those dark years, 2008, 2009, in terms of our labor force participation rate. When the governor was elected, when I stepped into this job, we were still lagging the national average by about 2%. We have just about closed that gap. We're just sitting below the federal average now in terms of labor force participation rate. So, I just wanted to point out that high level because all of the work that so many of you, in this room have done have gotten us to where we are in Michigan. The work that you've done has been the basis for the creation for the Reconnect program and the Achievement Scholarship. So I think we all need to recognize that kind of work. But I also want to put a plug in for our Michigan Center for Data Analytics. Ashlee talked about all of the data that we collect in Michigan, and there's been a real transformation in how we talk about the data that we collect. I want to put a plug in for an app on your phone, My Economy, which is supported by the Center for Data Analytics. It's, got Michigan data, at your fingertip. You can open it up and see where we are with many data points. And the Center for Data Analytics is also doing a lot across all of the state departments around the data that we gather and making that publicly available on their website. So I wanted to make sure that I touched on that as well. So
That's
I don't
great.
know if that directly answered your
Yes,
question.
yes,
but
thank you.
those were some points that I just wanted to make sure that we recognized today.
Great. Yeah, I did not know about that app myself. So once I free up some storage on my phone, I will go download it. That's good to know. And obviously, investments are critical. Our legislature supporting the investments for all of those great resources and programming you just described is critical. So Chase, in your policy work, how do you feel that workforce development data can help policymakers better align clean transportation, more broadly, policies with workforce realities that the companies are facing in the state?
Yeah, I think workforce data is really critical when you're talking about my role in advocacy and meeting with lawmakers and being at the legislature. Because it makes it more real for lawmakers when you have really good data to show them about how we're seeing job growth in Michigan's clean transportation sector, where the needs are more specifically. So then that also enables really more targeted investment or legislative solutions to try and address those gaps. I think one example, and Director Corbin mentioned this earlier, was the legislative charter to create the Community and Worker Economic Transition Office, which is, I feel like, been a resounding success on all accounts, and from the feedback that I hear from folks that participate there. And so that's another good example where we came to the legislature, there's a demonstrated gap. People were concerned about protecting our incumbent automotive workforce as the industry transitions, while also creating really targeted interventions to create new talent pipelines for the electric vehicle transition. And so the Community Economic Worker Transition Office has been a really great way, that legislative opportunity to fill the gap there. And then you also talked about investment when we're talking about where the state should be spending money, having good data about where the job gaps are, what specific training programs, we're seeing strong demand for like high voltage safety training. So it allows for more targeted interventions when we're talking about how we're spending state dollars, creating new programs. One of the programs that has been a really big success is the Going Pro Talent Fund. Has been around for over a decade and provided businesses across the state with opportunities to reskill and upskill their existing workforce or provide training for new hires. And we're seeing a lot more of those dollars being used in the automotive sector to transition folks into clean transportation, but also some of the other transitional sectors like other renewables and drone technology, marine applications, and those things. So I think there's a lot of opportunity, and the legislature has been really engaged, but having that really good data is what helps us to be really specific and targeted about what interventions we're using.
Thank you for that. That's super helpful. I have one more question for the panel, but then I think we have a few minutes to grab any from the audience. This one is for all or any of you. When you think about data, obviously we can look at it very literally, but behind that data is really a story, right? What's one recent workforce insight, report, or project your team has been working on that you're particularly excited about that maybe we haven't mentioned today?
I can kick us off with something that isn't necessarily, it doesn't start as workforce related, but I think it's got some really cool insights. And that is some work that we did with a company called Orange Sparkle Ball, which I know is kind of a funky name, but it's social network analysis, SNA, and that doesn't mean, Instaface, right? Which is what I assumed when I first heard that word. But it's really a measurement of the relationships between different entities and at which levels they collaborate with each other. And we've done that study now 3 times, 23, 4, 5. And here's what we found. This region is transforming from having the relationships that are characteristic of a manufacturing environment like we have historically been, to a more distributed one that is more in line with an innovation environment, like, Silicon Valley, Austin, places like that. And so what that means is more relationships with maybe not necessarily the same depth of interaction, but a greater frequency and a greater range. And so, essentially you have a more democratic, a more distributed set of relationships between entities. And I think for me, there are myriad workforce implications, but here's one. The fact that the way that we go about being us now looks so much structurally more like the Silicon Valleys and the Austins of the world means that the young people graduating from our institutions now, I hope, have a better reason to stay. Because even in my car days, I can't tell you how often we would do a workforce study and you talk to an automaker or supplier and you hear about, we have fabulous world-class institutions here, but the students graduate and they leave. And so, we were essentially using our world-class capabilities to train the workforce of other regions, right? And so now I am hoping with this innovation ecosystem that we have, all the startup incubators and, the data showing it in those relationships analyses that we do, that will help us not just train the people or educate them and so on, but actually hang on to them, which is, a second workforce problem that I don't think gets enough attention. But hopefully what we're seeing is a transformation that makes us stronger in that regard.
And I just want to add to that point, I think our most recent census data, and I think it's 2024, for the first time since the early 2000s, we had more people moving to Michigan from other states than are leaving Michigan to other states.
Yeah, and ditto, we've got population growth in Detroit itself as well. So it's really nice to see those dynamics happening together at the same time.
Thanks for sharing that, Bernard. If you haven't seen their social network analysis, it's fascinating. I definitely encourage you all to check it out. I know we participated in it, but it's also just been really interesting to see the progression over time. Chase?
Yeah, I think relatedly, talking about the next generation of the workforce retaining talent, I think I mentioned in my presentation our Clean Mobility Career Pathways report. One of the interesting insights there was some strategies about how we engage students even earlier in the talent pipeline. I think we're talking with stakeholders about how we meet the demands for EV jobs that are being created in the state. Is that when you're reaching students, in their last years of high school, they typically already have a pretty good sense of what they're going to be doing after graduation. And the unfortunate part is that we're seeing jobs being created like an electric vehicle charger installer or an EV charger technician, a job that didn't exist a decade ago. And so we don't have strong talent pipelines, and students can't picture themselves in those jobs because they don't know that they exist. And so it's really critical that we're getting it in front of students earlier. Programs like the Electric Vehicle Center has, or University of Michigan's Economic Growth Institute, to reach K-8 students with videos that can be integrated into their existing curriculum are really important to help them see how the automotive industry is transitioning, understand better what jobs are being created, and hopefully, again, retain that talent and those jobs because we know those jobs are being created right here in Michigan.
Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about as we talk about, the transition that we are making now, that we have ahead of us, and Chase has talked about as well the work that's happening in our community and worker transition office. And this, I need to go back a few years so that you can just sort of see the history of how we have been changing and adapting to this transition. 3 or 4 years ago, somebody from WIN might be able to give me a better date here. We created the EV Mobility Academy. And then after the creation of that academy, the White House designated Michigan as a workforce mobility hub. This was the previous administration. That work is now still continuing, and that it's continuing in our transition office. There are 150 employers, educational institutions, labor unions, local communities, our workforce partners and other training providers who are supporting that work. And I think one thing that became apparent in all of the people that were involved in that work is that as we think about the auto transition ahead of us, we need to bring together lots of data that we all are collecting or that we're all aware of. And so we are working with our Center for Data Analytics and with CAR, the Center for Automotive Research, and the Upjohn Institute. And we are about to release a report on sort of the Michigan auto transition, what we have ahead of us between now and 2030. So we're looking forward to that report. I hope it's a valuable resource to, everybody that is working on this solution. And I know a lot of people here have probably been thought partners on getting us to that point. And then one other little data point that I want to share, taking us back up to a higher level. Looking back at some past data in Michigan, we understand the critical importance of registered apprenticeships and the opportunities that people have to earn while they're learning and complete an apprenticeship and be on a fantastic pathway. In Michigan, on average, someone who completes an apprenticeship is earning $80,700, which is putting someone on a strong, in most parts of our state, a strong middle class wage. In 2017, while we are at an all-time high now of people who are in apprenticeships, we have over 24,000 people in Michigan in apprenticeships. That's the highest we've ever seen. Looking back at past data, I think in 2017, only 2% of women were in those. That's probably a little bit low. It was about 600 women were in registered apprenticeship programs in 27. And I guess that was slightly under, it was like 7 or 8% of people in apprenticeships were women. Knowing that data, we have been really working hard to bring more women into high-paying apprenticeships. We now have 2,200 women in registered apprenticeships.
That's great.
Still, still too small of a percentage, but we're making some strides there.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing those insights. And I'm super excited for that report, so I'm glad you closed sharing that with everyone. It's been a long time coming to see the committee that's come together to help inform that report. So excited to see that coming out. And I think it'll really inform all of our work. I know we are at time. So if you do have questions, I apologize. We won't be able to answer them in front of the group today, but please stay around. Our panelists hopefully have a few minutes. I think we're going into a break on the agenda. So stay around, ask your questions of the panelists directly, and I thank you all for joining us today.